I'm joined now by Aurel Braun from the U.S. state of Florida. He's a professor of international relations and political science at the University of Toronto. Professor, I have so many questions to get to, so bear with me. Let's begin with what many are asking right now as they watch every word out of Vladimir Putin's mouth and every action. So what can we expect next, and what is Putin's endgame?
He has taken a very major step by recognizing breakaway regions, which is a kind of prelude to the possible annexation of these regions to Russia, the way he did in the case of Crimea. It is clearly a violation of the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, where Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. It had the third largest arsenal in the world, even if it did not have the codes for these. They could have acquired them later on, in exchange for respecting the territorial integrity of the country. And Russia was one of the signatories. They clearly are ignoring that. The big question is, how far is Russia going to go?
No, actually, Professor Braun, I really want to get to this answer. What is Vladimir Putin's endgame here? We know what he's done. So what is his goal here?
I think ultimately he wants to have Ukraine as a failed state. He does not want to have a successful, vibrant Ukraine, which would present an alternate model to the kind of rule that he is running. So it's much more than about NATO. It is about basically saying that Ukraine is not a legitimate country. It is not a nationality being Ukrainian. It is an artificial construct. It is just an outpost of the West. But underneath that, what he is trying to do is to make sure that even if he takes Ukraine slice by slice, he ensures that it is a failed state.
Do you expect a full-scale military invasion of eastern Ukraine by Russian forces?
I think at the moment it's unlikely, because Mr. Putin is not reckless. He is cautious in these kind of matters. He tends to look for soft targets, and as Ukraine perhaps becomes a tougher target with increasing support from NATO, and perhaps also with doubts in China as to the wisdom of supporting Russian adventurism, he may have to settle for less than his ultimate goal, and he could just cash in his chips and take his winnings, because he has succeeded in some ways. You will notice that the West basically is trying to negotiate, or at least deter him from taking additional territory. There's not much about reversing the Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014, even though sanctions originally were instituted precisely with that purpose.
So what are the options for U.S. and its Western allies or partners beyond sanctions? I mean, at the end of the day, will sanctions change Vladimir Putin's behavior in any way?
So far, the sanctions that have been used have not left a particularly strong impression on Mr. Putin. They have been reactive and limited sanctions. What has been proposed so far, including the British sanctions, which are going further than what Germany has done. These are not sectoral sanctions. They do not go after SWIFT. So it's not the maximum that could be done. And clearly the Kremlin believes that they can endure these sanctions, that the kind of gains that they have by moving into Luhansk and Donetsk outweigh the cost of these sanctions. And ultimately, it is also a kind of reading that Mr. Putin has of Mr. Biden. Mr. Putin measures himself not against Western European countries. Look at the put-downs that have been used repeatedly against the French leader, Emmanuel Macron. He measures himself against the United States, even though Russia is not a superpower.
You mentioned Macron, the French president. Professor Braun, do you believe diplomacy is dead at this point?
It's on life support. It has not worked particularly well, and it has not worked in the case of the French president, where the Kremlin spokesman said, well, yes, France is a member of NATO, a member of the EU, but you are not the leader of NATO. And that, I think, is hardly flattering to Mr. Macron. And it is a matter of how does the Kremlin and Mr. Putin specifically view Mr. Biden. And he does not seem to have a great deal of respect for the American president, and nor does he fear the American president.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Professor Aurel Braun, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Coming up, testing.